Hey, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining today's webinar. We are going to be talking about the basics of eligibility for FSA and NRCS programs. I'm having a little bit of trouble with the internet this morning, so hopefully my screen share keeps up with my talking and everything looks fine. If the recording is not okay, I will just re-record it by myself, so you will still have access to a good quality version of this webinar, regardless of my technical difficulties this morning. So just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started here. This webinar is being recorded, like I just said, and I will post it to the Washington State FSA website in the next couple of days. You can access it by going to fsa.usda.gov/WA and navigating to the webinar page on the left-hand menu there. Or you can get there by scanning this QR code on the page here. Mics and cameras are turned off for attendees, so if you have a question, please type it in the chat at any time, and I will get to it at the next convenient stopping point. The way that it works is you type your question into the Q&A section, and then you send it. It goes to the moderators, which today is just me, and is not visible to the rest of the attendees unless we publish it. If your chat box is not showing on your screen, you can go ahead and open it by clicking the text bubble with the question mark in it in the upper right of the window. It's right next to the leave button if you want to ask a question during, or if you don't want to ask a question during the presentation, or if you come up with one later, feel free to email me. My contact information is on the next slide and the last slide. All right, so the next webinar is scheduled for July 3rd. We are skipping June, mostly because I will be out of town, but also because most farmers are out in the field anyway. Tentatively, the topic will be the Non-Insured Crop Disaster Assistance Program for value loss crops like flowers, shellfish, and Christmas trees. I covered yield-based crops back in March, but I will do a quick review of that information for those of you with fall crops. I say it's tentative because with 2 months between now and then, you never know what might come up and what might be more important for you to know about than NAP a few months ahead of the deadline. If something else comes up, I will cover NAP in August. Like I just said, I post these recordings to the Washington State webinar page. Here's that QR code again if you need it. Feel free to shoot me an email if you have any suggestions for future topics, or if you have any feedback on how I can make these better. All right, and with that, I will dive into eligibility. Here are the topics that I'm going to cover today. As you can see, there's a lot that I'm planning to go over, and each of these sections is one of the basic eligibility forms that you need to complete in order to be eligible for any FSA program, and most of these forms are required for NRCS programs as well. I will review how to fill out the form, what your responsibilities are, and provide additional pertinent information for the ones that warrant it. The AD 1026 in particular requires some additional information. I'll also be taking questions as we go, so feel free to type your questions in at any time. There's really no reason to wait until the end, especially if you have a relevant question that might guide the discussion. All right, so what's with all this paperwork that we give you before you even actually get the application that you want to apply for? Well, the Agricultural Act of 1970 established the first payment limitation and payment eligibility rules. It capped the annual payment a person was able to receive from FSA to $55,000, and this was the first payment limitation ever. For USDA. And it required the secretary to define the term person, which was essentially the first regulation regarding payment eligibility. Since then, farm bills and various budget acts have made amendments and modifications to our eligibility requirements. And the paperwork you fill out today is just a product of 50 years of legislative history. That's it for the history lesson. So one of the first forms you'll fill out is the AD 2047, which is the customer data worksheet. The AD 2047 gives us permission to enter your information into our system. So that means all owners, operators, entities, individuals, all members of entities, anyone with power of attorney, etc., needs to complete this form so that they can be in our system. Please note that if you are applying to a program as an entity, you will need to fill out an additional form for not just the entity, but separately for each member of the entity as well. And this is going to be a common theme with most of our paperwork. It basically boils down to if you have a different social security number or EIN than another entity or individual, you're going to need to do a separate form. So here's the first part of the customer data worksheet. The fine print at the top informs you of our authority to request this information in the first place and how we use or disclose the information. Don't worry, we're not disclosing your personal information to just anyone. We disclose your information to our partners like NRCS when necessary, like if you're applying for one of their programs. That would be necessary. Once you read that, you can move on to filling out Part A. This part is pretty intuitive because it's mostly asking for your contact information. I do want to bring your attention to item 2G, which asks if you want to receive sensitive but non-PII emails. That would be, get my laser pointer here. Here we go, 2G. So we will not send information like your social security number or other information that's designated as personally identifiable information or PII, but we will send you other pertinent information like forms and information about your participation in programs. For item 3A, which I also want to bring your attention to, we need your full social security number or EIN if you checked new customer in item 1. If you checked update existing record, then you only need to provide us with the last 4 so that we can be sure that we're updating the correct producer profile record. The second part of the 2047 asks for demographic information. We don't use this information to administer programs. It's just collected for statistical purposes. If you're updating an existing record or you don't wish to provide this information, you can skip it. If you are filling out the form for an entity, though, please base your responses on the individual person or people who make up at least 50% of the ownership interest. And then this is the last part of the form. In number 5, you'll indicate which agencies you participate with. If you're not sure, you can just check FSA. We can always change it later. Number 6 asks if you are a multi-county producer. If you or the entity you are filling out the form for has farming interests in multiple counties, go ahead and check yes, and then you'll need to list which counties those are. But if you are contained into one county, you can go ahead and check no and move on. So the last thing that you need to worry about is the customer signature section where you just sign title and date. The county office will do the rest of the form, and then at the very bottom, which I don't actually have pictured here, is some more fine print, and this particular fine print provides you with information on how to file a discrimination complaint and how persons with disabilities can access resources to fill out this form and other forms using methods like large print, audio tape, etc. If anyone who needs those services is on the call today, you can call the Federal Relay Service at 800-877-8339. All right, and we're already on to the next form. The CCC 901 and 902. The 901 is the members information form, and the 902 is the farm operating plan. Questions already? All right, a couple of questions before we dive in. So if I'm applying as an entity, a 501c3 land trust or an LLC, I'm not clear what other forms I need or what personal information I need for the members of those organizations. So if it is a nonprofit, they don't really have members, so we would only need the information for the nonprofit itself and then the person with signing authority. If you are an LLC, then you would need to fill out the forms for the LLC as an entity itself, and then every member of the LLC as well. As far as what personal information, we will get to that as we proceed through the rest of the forms. And And then is your land trust, is it a nonprofit or is it, I'll go ahead and publish those so everyone can see that. Is your land trust a nonprofit or is it an LLC? While we're waiting for an answer there. Unless I answer your question, then you can leave it. I'll go on and start talking about the 902. All right, so I am starting with the 902 because not everyone is going to need to fill out a 901. In fact, most people aren't going to need to fill out a 901. But before I show you the form itself, I just want to go over a few things about it. Okay, so the nonprofit does have members. If the members don't have an ownership share of the LLC, then you don't need to provide their information. But if they do, like, if they own a portion of the proceeds coming from it, which they then receive, then we would consider them to have an ownership share, and then we would need all of their information, just like any other entity. I hope that makes sense. Okay, so going over a few things on the 902. First of all, the form I'm going to be showing you is the manual 902E. We don't actually use this form very often, but it does do a good job of showing you what kind of information you can expect to provide. Most of you should not be filling out this version of this form because we really want you to be working with your county office to do this. So I'm not going to go over every box like I normally would. And instead, I'll show you the main points of what you need when you come into the county office to complete the form with them directly in our software. So to emphasize, it's best practice to make an appointment and do the 902 with your county office staff. Second, the purpose of completing the 902 is for us to determine if all recipients have sufficient risk in the farming operation in order to be receiving money from our programs. It is taxpayer money after all, so we want to make sure that it's going to the people who are actually farming. We determine risk by looking at what we call left-hand and right-hand contributions. The left-hand contributions are generally more objective and quantifiable. They are specifically land, capital, and equipment. So those are all things where ownership is known and it's easy to assign a dollar value to those. The right-hand contributions are still fairly objective, but they are maybe a little bit more of a gray area. These are labor and management of the operation, but you'll see when I go into it how it's not as subjective as it may sound to you right now. All right, so here you see part A and B of the manual 902E. In these parts, we gather the very basic information about your entity or individual, if applicable. I just want to bring your attention to the last box where it says that trust documents are required for all irrevocable trusts and that we reserve the right to require other documentation supporting any of the information you provide in Part A, B, or C. Honestly, we can ask for supporting documentation for anything that you put on this form, but this box in Part B here is specifically talking about trusts, so that you need to provide us with a copy of your trust documents. All right, Part C is where you list the information of all the members of the entity. If you are actually filling out this manual form and you have embedded entities, then you'll need to complete a 901 as well. The form reminds you of this in box 3, but if you're doing this in our software with our staff, then the county office then the software will allow you to enter all the necessary information so that the 902 manual form, it will allow you to enter all the information without having to fill out subsequent forms like attachments. There's a question about 901s and 902s for tribes and tribal ventures. Yes, tribes and tribal ventures are eligible to participate. I'm not sure about water management entities. If you want to email me that question, I can pass it along to the specialist to get you some more information on that. But for tribes and tribal ventures, you do need to fill out a 902 just so that we have it on file. But you do need to fill out a manual one because our software doesn't allow us to create a software version of the form for whatever reason. I'm honestly not sure why, but you'll just have to fill out a manual version. And I still recommend that you make an appointment with the county office to do that. C. All right, here is the rest of Part C. This is where we gather information about minors and citizenship information. If you do have any members of your operation who are not U.S. citizens, then we will need copies of their green card in order for their share to be eligible for payment. If they don't have a green card, then their share will not be eligible for payment, but the entity may still be paid as long as they didn't own 100% of it. And here you can see Part D. This is basically a summary of the next 6 sections. Now that we've gathered the basic information for the entity, we can start to look at everybody's actual contributions. And sorry, my mouse is getting in the way here. Anyway, so that means that in order to be considered at risk, contributions must be commensurate. That means that you must provide contributions that are valued at least 50% of your share. So if you own 80% of an operation, then you need to provide at least 40% of the contributions in order for those contributions to be considered at risk. Here we go. Is a 902 required before a CRP contract is valid? Yes, you do need to have a 902 on file in order to have for a CRP contract to even be approved in the first place. So Part E on the screen here asks for details about the land contributed for the farming operation. If you do this with your county office, then most of this information is going to automatically populate from the farm record that you have on file with us. You will only need to provide us with any additional information that does not auto-populate, like the rental rate, leasing information, etc. It's best to bring copies of your leases to your appointment if you have them. Makes it a bit easier to do this part. Part F here is where you'll provide information on how you fund your operation. Keep in mind that this is a farm operating plan. So if the information on here changes as situations change throughout the crop year, it's not a problem. As long as you provide us with accurate information and you do it in good faith, you won't hear complaints from us. The next section, Part G, is for information about the equipment being used on the farming operation. All the percentages in this section are based on the annual rental value of that type of equipment, not on the number of items being contributed. That way, if one guy contributes a combine and another guy contributes, say, like 3 tractors and a trailer, the value of the contribution of the high value combine won't be overshadowed by the other guy who's contributing 4 different pieces of equipment. Then we have Part H, which is about custom services. If you don't use custom services, then you don't have to worry about this part. But if you do, you would just say what type of services are being provided and where and who's providing them. All right, and this is Part I. This is the first of the 2 right-hand contributions, labor and management. These are the ones that are a little less objectively quantifiable. So in this part, we specifically want to know about what labor is being provided by people who are not members of the entity. This does include any family members of entity members if they do not belong to the entity directly. Please note that if the hired labor comes from the same source as either any leased equipment or any custom service, then you may need to provide some supporting documentation there of whatever your agreement with that person or business is. And then the last major part is for management information. In this section, you'll enter all the management duties that go that go into your farming operation and whose responsibility they are. For the most part, these duties tend to be performed by the members of the entity or by individuals making the application, if it's a smaller one. However, hired and other management is not uncommon. An example of hired management is, say, a hired parlor manager on a dairy who's in charge of staffing decisions for parlor operations. And an example of other management might be the spouse of one of the members who doesn't have direct ownership and also isn't paid for their labor or management in this case. All right, and Part K here gives you the space to make any necessary remarks and let us know if you need to include any supplemental forms. This is primarily just on the manual form if you're using it, but there's also a remarks section on the online form. But if you're doing it online, then you don't have any of these continuation forms to worry about. And lastly, we have Part L. This is where you sign. Again, as always, make sure you read the fine print that you are signing to before you actually put down your signature. There shouldn't be anything unexpected in this fine print, but basically you're agreeing that it's your responsibility to let us know if there are any changes in your operation. You read the definitions on page 6 if you have this manual form so that you know that you filled it out properly, and that you will provide any additional information that we may require in order to verify the information on this form. If you do happen to complete a manual 902 and you have embedded entities, then you will need to also complete the 901. Starting with number 1, 2, and 3 up here. This is your county, state, and program year. Most of the time, that's going to be the current fiscal year. Then you see some fine print again, similar to the 2047. This is our authority to request this information and the disclosure information again. Moving on to Part A. At the top, you will enter the name of the entity and the full EIN over here. And then in column 1, these are all of the members. And then in column 2, we either need the full Social Security and tax ID if you're not already in the system, or the last 4 will do if you are already in the system. Mailing address, and then ownership share of this entity listed here. And then lastly, it asks if the corresponding member has signature authority for this legal entity. As you can see, that my example LLC down here cannot sign because it wouldn't be like a person's signature. And then Part B, this is where the embedded entity goes. So you see that example LLC up here now, and their their EIN. And then it lists the members of the embedded entity in this section. And then if they have signature authority for the embedded entity. Part D is just for if any of the members are minors. Most of you will probably just need to check the box that says NA, but if you do have minors in your entity, columns 1 through 5 are pretty simple. It's just the minor's name, their birthday, the parent's name and address, and then the parent's social. And then Part 6 asks questions to determine the separate status of any minors. There may be situations where the minor has their own business, property, or household that's separate from the parents, and that information would come up here. And lastly, we have Parts E and F. Part E is about any members who are foreign persons. Just like on the 902, this section is basically the same. It asks for their name, if they are, and if they have a valid green card. And then someone with signature authority for the top entity can sign this form and date in Part F, and that's it. All right, next I'm going to cover the AD 1026. I think this form causes more confusion and frustration than any of our other forms. Luckily, too bad once you have someone explain it. So before I dive into the form, I just want to talk about the word compliance. The 1026 is used to determine if you are compliant with our provisions for highly erodible land conservation, which is abbreviated to HELC, and wetland compliance, which is abbreviated to WC. These provisions only apply to FSA and NRCS, and to a lesser extent to crop insurance programs. And since it only applies to our programs, we don't use determinations that may have been done by the county, state, or any private companies. We only use determinations that have been done by NRCS. So to distill a 275-page handbook down to a few words, the HELC and WC provisions are there to make sure that federal funds don't go to people who are improperly farming sensitive land in an effort to reduce soil loss and erosion and preserve the nation's wetlands. So no converted wetlands, no growing certain crops on land that is predominantly considered highly erodible. And I'll talk about that more as I go through the form. Alrighty, so this is part A of the AD 1026. You can see that the very first thing is telling you to read the AD 1026 appendix before completing the form. I highly recommend that you do so. There's a lot of information in the appendix that will help you fill out the form accurately for your situation. So box 1 here is the name of the producer. This is the name of the person filing the form or the entity who is making the application. Or it could also be an affiliated person who's listed in box 4 of another person's form. Then box 2 is the last 4 of the tax ID number, and box 3 is the crop year for which you are applying for benefits. Generally, again, this is the current year, but there are cases, especially towards the end of the fiscal year, where it could be the next year. In box 4, you will list all the affiliated persons with farming interests. If there are none, make sure you enter none. And this gets a little bit complicated, so I actually have a whole slide coming up on it next. But before I get there, then there's box 5. The checkbox, either one of these, is for this checkbox is for people who do not have an interest in land devoted to agriculture. The people who should check this box include shellfish growers, people who only grow crops in greenhouses, where the plants are planted into pots or raised beds, so not in the soil profile. And beekeepers who exclusively place their hives on somebody else's land can also check this box. Nobody else. The second box should be checked if you meet all 3 of those bullet points. If you don't participate in any USDA programs that are subject to this form except crop insurance. If you are just in the application stage of an FSA or NRCS program, you are considered to be participating in it. So if you're participating, then this doesn't apply to you. The second bullet says that you only have an interest in ag land that's exclusively used for perennial crops. And the third bullet says that you have not converted a wetland after 2014. So if you meet all 3 of those, then you can check this box and move on. Most people won't be checking either one of those. So I'm going to move on to part B. Well, first I'm going to talk about affiliated persons. First of all affiliated persons must complete their own AD 1026 form. I'm going to say that again. All affiliated persons must complete their own AD 1026 form. There is a table in the appendix to help you figure out who's considered affiliated and who is not. All affiliated persons with farming interests need to be listed in box 4. A person or entity is considered to have a separate farming interest if they have interest as an owner, operator, or other producer of a farm that is separate from the entity that's applying. Some common examples are people applying to USDA programs as individuals, LLCs, and corporations. LLCs and corporations are pretty simple. Any first-level member of an LLC or any first-level shareholders with more than 20% interest for corporations are all considered affiliated. Individuals are a little bit more complicated. Spouses or children are considered affiliated persons if they receive USDA benefits under their own tax ID number. Estates, trusts, partnerships, and joint ventures that the individual or individual's spouse or minor children have an interest in are also considered affiliated. and any corporations in which the individual spouse or minor children has more than 20% interest would also be considered affiliated. There are a couple of questions in the chat. What does U in UHEL stand for? It means undetermined. It just means that there's no official determination on file for highly erodible land for a particular field. And then regarding the highly erodible form, what would forestry operations click the top box? No, you are considered to be participating if you're applying for one of our programs. So generally, forestry operations will still need to fill out Part B, which I'll get to in a second, but they tend to be able to answer no for all of the questions, and then they can just move on. That'll make more sense in a second, I promise. If an LLC is completing a 1026 and the members have no other farming interests, do they need to be listed? Yes. Okay, the next part of the form is where I get the most questions. Part B is a series of yes or no questions. The first one asks if you are growing or plan to grow an agricultural commodity on land without an existing highly erodible land determination. We consider an agricultural commodity to be any crop produced by annual tilling of the soil. This does include no-till operations and one-trip planters. It does not include perennial crops like orchards and hay or timber. If you are breaking out new ground, make sure you let us know beforehand. And if you tell us after and it turns out that the land was highly erodible, you could be in violation of the highly erodible land provisions. Second question, number 7A, asks if you or anyone else has created new drainage systems, done any land leveling, filling, dredging, clearing, or excavation that has not already been evaluated by NRCS. This question includes if you plan to do any of these activities during the year you entered at the top of the form. If you do plan to do any of these things, please make sure you let us know before you do them. NRCS will need to conduct a wetland determination, and they need as much notice as possible to get that done. So as soon as the thought enters your mind, let us know so we can have NRCS go do that determination. And if you change your mind later, that's fine. We'll have the determination on file and you can make management decisions however you want after that. The third question, 7B, asks if you have or intend to improve or modify an existing drainage system. Improving or modifying in this case means to increase its capacity in some way. For instance, installing tile with a larger diameter than the tile that's already there would count as an improvement or modification, and you would check yes in that case. And then the last question asks if you're going to perform any maintenance activities on an existing drainage system that has not been evaluated by NRCS. Maintenance means repair or replacement in this case, so as long as the capacity of the drainage system remains the same and the location, then it is considered maintenance, and you would check yes for that project here. And box 8 has 2 check boxes. If they are applicable to you, you will check whichever one. The first one is for if you are participating in crop insurance, and this is the first time you're filling out one of these forms. And the second box is for situations where either a tenant will not be in compliance because of the landlord, or vice versa, the landlord will not be in compliance because of the tenant. So if you answered yes to any of these questions, then you'll need to go ahead and fill out Part C. If you answered no to all of them, then you can move on to Part D, which is where you sign and you're done with the form. So Part C here. This is where you provide us with information that NRCS will need in order to complete their determinations. So first we need to know which farm tract and field number the activity is taking place on. If you are applying to a program for the first time, you may not have your farm number yet. It is important to know that this form is not complete without that information. So if you turn it in anyway, we'll have to send it back to you and you'll need to initial and date the addition of that farm and tract number. And that's okay. We don't mind doing that. If you want to get all of your forms done at the same time and you don't mind putting an initial on one more at the end, that's totally fine with us. B asks what the activity is. This would be the reason you answered yes to one of those questions above. Some examples would be like breaking out new ground, pulling stumps, something like that. And then C asks what the current land use is. If it's crops, you would specify what they are. If it's not crops, you just say whatever you're using it for. And then the county. And that's the physical county. There may be cases where it's physically located in one place but administered somewhere else. We want to know where it's physically located. And then the last section is part D. So by signing, you are saying that you read and understand that appendix that I mentioned before, and that you understand you are responsible for any non-compliance, that you are aware this form is continuous and does not need to be refiled unless revoked. Please note that this form can be revoked for reasons other than non-compliance. For instance, if you buy or lease more property, or if you plan to do an activity that may affect your HEL or wetland determinations, then you'll need to complete a new form because it will be considered revoked. So if all that is okay and makes sense, go ahead and sign in box 10 and put your title of if applicable in 10B and date in 10C. And that's it for the 1026. After you turn in this form to NRCS, to FSA, we then turn it over to NRCS. If you answered yes to any of those questions in Part B, they'll make the needed determinations, and sometimes that means they'll need to reach out to you. So you may get a call from NRCS even if you're only participating in FSA programs. All right, good. No new questions on the 1026. The next form that we're going to go over is the CCC 941 form. You will more often hear this called the AGI form. This is where you tell us if you made more or less than $900,000 on average over the previous 3 tax years. So this here is pretty much the whole form. It's very simple, and I think that confuses people sometimes. Like they think it should be harder. I mean, it's a tax form, so maybe it should be. I'm starting with box 2 because the county office will usually fill out box 1 for you. It's just their return address. So in box 2, you will enter 1 name and 1 address. If you are a husband and wife, even if you file jointly, we just want 1 name per form, which probably means that you'll need to fill out multiple forms. We will have to send it back to you if it's not correct because the IRS won't accept it from us if it's not correct. So there may be some back and forth until it's 100% right. In box 3, you'll enter the tax ID number that belongs to the name in box 2. And you must put all 9 digits. The last 4 will not be acceptable in any situation. So that's a social security number for individuals and an EIN for any entities. In box 4, you will enter the applicable year for which you are requesting benefits. And lastly, in box 5, you will check either box A, that your adjusted gross income for the year above is less than $900,000, or box B indicated that your AGI is more than $900,000. The adjusted gross income is calculated using the average of the 3 taxable years before the preceding taxable year for which benefits are being requested. I know that wording is odd. Luckily, there is a chart on page 2 of the AGI form when you have it in your hand. So if you're applying for the 2024 program, then the tax years that you want to average are 2020, 21, and 22. And this here is the second half of the form. This is the consented disclosure part. When you sign the form, you are allowing the IRS to tell us if you answered correctly. You don't have to provide copies of your tax returns to us generally, so instead we take this form and we send it to the IRS. They review your tax returns for you and then verify your answer. And the fine print here says exactly which forms the IRS will be reviewing. Then the bold part is your acknowledgements. And I want to bring your attention to the first line of bold that says, an approved power of attorney form FSA 211 on file with USDA cannot be used as evidence of signature authority when completing this form. Only a durable power of attorney that has been approved by our lawyers can be used as proof of power of attorney for this form. So when you're done reading, you can sign title and date at the bottom. Be sure to use the date that you are actually signing. I have definitely seen plenty of birthdays make their way into this box, but it should be the date of signature. Some additional information about the AGI form. You do have to complete this form every year that you are applying for benefits. If the applicant is an entity, then every member of the entity must complete this form as well. If there are embedded entities, again, they and their members must also complete the form. Any payments will be reduced by the share of incomplete forms. So if you have a big corporation with lots of members and either some of their memberships are really small or some people just don't want to complete this form, the corporation can still be paid. It'll just be reduced by those people's membership shares. The form must be returned to FSA within 90 days in order for the consent to tax form disclosure to be valid. The IRS then has 180 days, from the signature date to provide their determination. If we don't have a determination from the IRS within that time frame, then we will have to ask for a new form. Allows for a CPA or attorney to provide a statement that a producer's AGI does not exceed $900,000. This certification can be used instead of waiting for an IRS determination, which makes it a good option if you need a determination quickly, which is needed in some situations. Even if you choose to go this route, you still need to fill out the 941 form and provide that to us. So in order for a CPA or attorney statement to be acceptable, there is some specific information that it needs to include. It must have the CPA or attorney's license number, the reason for the statement. The CPA or attorney must acknowledge that they are aware of the AGI limitations, definitions, programs involved, and compliance requirements in 7 CFR Part 1400. False certification may result in sanctions, including criminal sanctions. And additional information may be requested by USDA, and further inquiry may be made to the IRS to ensure that all information is correct. The statement will also need to include any other relevant information on the most recently filed tax returns for the applicable 3-year period. And I don't have it listed here on the slide, but if the tax returns indicate that the AGI is above the limitation and the CPA/attorney statement, or then the statement will need to explain how the AGI limitation regulations were not exceeded, even though they appear to be. There is an example of what this kind of statement would look like in the handbook. So if you decide to go this route and you need to see an example, you can either ask the county office to provide you the reference, or you can look it up yourself because handbooks are public information. And I put the exact reference on the slide so you can find it quickly if you need to. All right, policy also allows you to provide us with your own tax information rather than us having to go through the IRS for it. Again, another good option if you need a quick determination. Just like with the CPA statement option, you do still need to file the CCC 941 form. The specific information you'll need to provide us depends on how your taxes are filed. If the name on the AGI form is a corporation, then we need the IRS form 1120. If the name on the AGI form is an individual, then we'll need your 1040, and comparable forms might be acceptable. And you do need to provide all 3 applicable years. So the years that you would average to determine the AGI, those are the years that you need to provide to us. All right, question. Currently, 2 CRP programs. Can FSA provide a report that summarizes how much has been paid to be in CRP program, how much costs have been incurred, how much cost sharing reimbursement payments have been made? Need this to understand if it's better to stay in CRP or to get out. Yes, they can provide you a copy of everything that we've paid to you. It can be by contract, it can be by person. You just ask your county office and they can provide you the information for all those payments. Okay. Back to providing tax information. All right, so that was it for the AGI form. So the next form that we're going to cover is the CCC 860. This is a self-certification form for historically underserved, limited resource, and beginning farmers. It's not required, but having it on file can help you gain access to additional benefits within our existing programs. Here is the first part of the form. Like usual, you can see the county office information in the upper right, box 2, name and address. And then I also want to bring your attention to the information block underneath box 2. It says that in order for an entity to be considered, for an entity to meet these definitions of the form, sorry. It's actually pages 3 and 4 of the form, not page 2 like it says on here. But the gist is that 50% of the ownership of the entity must be held by historically underserved, limited resource, or beginning/veteran farmers. Part A is for those who are certifying as a member of one of those groups listed here, right there. There are 2 groups, those that have been historically subject to gender prejudice and those that have been historically subject to ethnic or racial prejudice. We split these apart because some programs provide additional benefits to those who identify with the latter, but do not provide those benefits to those who identify as women. The second half of the form has more options. Part B is for limited resource farmers and ranchers. Limited resource is defined as a producer whose direct or indirect gross farm sales do not exceed the amount identified in the limited resource farmer/rancher self-determination tool in each of the 2 calendar years that precede the complete taxable year before the relevant program, and whose total household income was at or below the national poverty level for a family of 4 in each of those same 2 tax years. The easiest way to check this is to use the calculator on the limited resource farmer tool, and the link for that is right on the form. Then part C is for beginning farmers and ranchers. Those are farmers who have not operated a farm or ranch for more than 10 years. You will need to enter the month and year that you started farming. And then part D is for veteran farmers and ranchers. Veteran farmers fall into this category as long as they obtain veteran status within the last 10 years and who have not operated a farm or ranch for more than 10 years. So you will need to enter both the day and year that you started farming and the day and year that you received the veteran status. All right, part E on the second page here talks about the non-insured crop disaster assistance program, because by completing this form, you are considered to have catastrophic coverage. It's important to know that you are covered in the event of a natural disaster for 50% of your crop at 55% of the market value. It's not a lot of coverage, but it is free coverage. If you are interested in better coverage, then you can purchase premium coverage at a 50% discount, and the link on the form provides you with the basic provisions of NAP. So now that you have this coverage, you need to know how to use it. Otherwise, it's not really worth anything. So really quick, if you have a loss or if you think you had a loss but aren't sure yet, call your county office and ask about filing a notice of loss for NAP. At 55%. You can make sure you can file as many of the notices of loss as you want, even if one isn't enough to trigger a payment. 3 losses might be enough to trigger a payment. To learn more, you can watch the March webinar on the NAP yield-based crops. And like I said, I'll be doing another one for value loss crops coming up here in July, or possibly August if something else comes up for July. So the value loss crops are floriculture, shellfish, Christmas trees. There are a few more like ginseng, but we don't really grow that here. So you can check out the NAP webpage or talk to your county office about more information on that. And then if you don't want NAP, then you can opt out by checking the box. Moving on, Part F is for your signature. I included some of the fine print in this screenshot because it addresses a common concern, and that's privacy data. This says that we can provide your information to partners like other federal agencies. Just like everything else, we provide what's necessary for them to do their jobs. For instance, if you're applying for EQIP, which is run by NRCS, then we provide them with your information. But like I said, only what they need. There are 2 more pages for this form that provide you with a lot of the additional information that I explained over the last 2 slides, things like definitions and more information on NAP. All right, question on the 860. Are the 860 forms for all FSA and NRCS programs, and what are the benefits of completing this form? I know that they are for FSA programs because I work for FSA and I would know that, but I don't know if NRCS uses the 860 form. The benefits of completing the form: various programs provide additional benefits to people with this form on file. So for instance, say you're applying for one of our disaster programs. A lot of our disaster programs pay a % of the market value of whatever you lost. And if you have an 860 on file, then it would pay a higher % of that market value. Or like with the example for NAP, you can get catastrophic coverage for free. Whereas if you don't have that form on file, you would have to pay, I think it's like $325 per crop just for catastrophic. So there are benefits to filling it out, but they are within existing programs. There are no special programs for having filled out an 860. All right, the last form, and I know that this one does not apply to NRCS, but it does apply to all of FSA programs. This allows us to actually send you the money. That is the whole reason that you're doing all this paperwork in the first place. We are now required to make all payments through the direct deposit. It is possible to get a waiver under extremely limited circumstances, though. And they are so limited, like you have to have some barrier preventing you from having a bank account, basically. Luckily, this form is pretty simple. So this is the section that a producer would be concerned with. There's a part above, but it's just the county office information. The section that says payee/company information is your contact information and social security number or your EIN as applicable. It should match the name on the application for whatever program you're applying for. And then the second part is the financial institution information, and this is your bank's information as well as your account information. This part does have to be filled out by your bank, including the signature at the bottom. That's your bank signature. Or if you don't want to go to the bank and have them filled out this section and you have checks, you can send us a voided check instead. A photocopy of the check is totally fine as long as you put void in the signature block. But deposit slips cannot be accepted, so it does have to be an actual check. And that's it for this presentation. So I had a lot of good questions coming in through the chat. Thank you for asking those, and I will continue to be here for a little while. Feel free to send in any additional questions that you come up with, or my contact information is on here. So if you wanted some clarification about a question that was already asked, or if you want, or anything else, if you have feedback, whatever, feel free to email me. I may direct you to email me your questions if it's something that I don't know the answer to. That's where you send it to. And then just a final word, again, this recording will be on the webinar page. I usually get these up day of, so this will hopefully be up this afternoon, but I always get them up by Friday. And with that, I will open it up to more questions. And if anyone needs to go, feel free to go. All right, it doesn't seem like there are too many more questions coming in. I will still hang out here for the next 4 minutes, but we will call this concluded.